Hey, what's up, y'all? As you guys are coming in here, as we always do, would love to hear where you guys are from in the chat. And yeah, just kind of take a look at where everybody's hailing from today. We got coaches obviously wrapping up sessions here at the top of the hour. So want to give them a minute or two to get in. As you guys are trickling in, again, let us know where you're from in the chat. Knoxville, welcome. Montana, hell yeah. London, your first international of the day. Let's go. Yeah, hell yeah. What's up, everybody? Diverse group. Hell yeah. We're in like every sector of the US right now. It's awesome. I love it. Welcome, folks. So we'll kind of dive into it. I have my opening blurb that I got to read, and then we'll dive into it, folks. Unracked is a live conversation series from Bridge Athletic. Bridge provides coaching tools to world-renowned organizations like the Atlanta Falcons, Naval Special Warfare, University of Arizona, and Westside Barbell. They provide those very same tools for coaches like me and you to use in our communities to deepen the training experience. Unracked is a free educational series Bridge puts on to break down the training systems, methods, and philosophies that drive performance at the highest level. Each episode takes you inside a specific approach, how it's built, how it's applied, and how it evolves under real world conditions. The views expressed by our guests are their own and don't necessarily reflect the positions of Bridge Athletic or our partners. Today's guest is a true subject matter expert in the tactical field of human performance. He spent nearly 15 years coaching, preparing, and sustaining America's warfighters. Earlier in the year, you may have seen Joe's presentation as part of our Tactical Convergence event. If you watch that, you know Joe's mission is to cultivate relationships through coaching blended with the skillful integration of performance technology and data analysis. Believe that regardless of what population you work with today, you know, you should really understand the locus of Joe's work. Joe has been a true driving force behind the emergence of innovation in high performance training, monitoring, recovery methodology, and applied analytics in the tactical human performance space. And he's made a really substantial impact in specialized high stress tactical populations. Okay. So his devotion to the craft, I think, is one worth striving for, especially if you feel like a really strong sense of duty to help your athletes. Joe Denk, who has to give a disclaimer before we begin. Welcome to the show, man.
Hey, Coop, thanks for having me on, and thanks for everybody taking the time to log in today and break away from your day. Truly honored and humbled to be here. We've got to start with a quick legal kind of ethical disclaimer. I have no financial conflict of interest. I'm not endorsing any product or policy, and I am speaking entirely in my unofficial capacity as a private citizen. These are my personal opinions and views and do not represent the views of the Army, H2F, the Department of War, the United States government, or any other official body, agency, or organization. Stoked to be on the podcast, brother. Let's have a great conversation today.
Beautiful. Hell yeah. Well, I want to give a little context, I think, to how I view Joe, so that you guys can understand a little bit about where we're going to start. So, I view Joe as someone who's like truly at the tip of the spear, in his neck of the woods, and I sort of view him as like a frontiersman. You know what I mean? Someone who is like out there pioneering like old West type stuff. So like with that in mind, I think it's important to understand like the origin point and kind of how you got to, have that opportunity, Joe. So if you want to start by explaining to everyone here, like, how you got your start in this stuff and how you progressed on, that would be I think a great thing for us to know.
Yeah, I love the frontier analogy. Maybe I should have worn more of a cowboy getup or something like that on here. But you know, everybody has a point in their career where things change, and you're trying to figure out what your vocation is in life and where you're trying to go with your career. And a lot of times you figure it out in flight, right? So it's you very rarely map this stuff out in advance. And I know when I think about back at my origin, where I've come from, where my career has taken me, I think God has really blessed me quite a bit. I want to give a lot of credit to my family, mentors, leaders, teammates, colleagues, and the warfighters I've had a chance to work with over the time, and just incredible individuals. I've learned so much from them. I've tested theories off. Some of you probably listening, we might not even agree on everything, and that's awesome because that drives forward the progress, right? So I think I just want to start by saying thank you to all those people who have made a difference in my life and my career and supported me on this journey. So very, very blessed in that capacity, and thank God for that. I think when I think back to where my career started, you know, 9/11 was my senior year of high school, right? And I was, I was a mediocre athlete. I knew I wasn't somebody who was going to go play Division I sports. I played really big football, high school, wrestled, was constantly involved in athletics, but was not one of the most purely gifted athletic kids. And to be quite honest, my work ethic at the time kind of sucked, right? And I actually wanted to be a lawyer. That's what I wanted to go to college for. And then 9/11 happened and the world truly changed. I still remember sitting in the weight room with our high school football coach who pulled the whole team. And he was a disciplinarian. He was a guy who never took time off from practice. I'm sure a lot of people could relate to that. You need those kind of mentors in your life. We didn't appreciate him at the time, but man, did they influence us. And he told us, hey, everybody go home. The whole world has changed today. And you're sitting there 17, 18 years old. You don't really appreciate the gravity of that moment, but it truly changed my entire life. 2 weeks later, I was in the recruiting office and joined the United States Navy. And I wound up shipping to boot camp, I think 7 days after high school graduation, because I wanted to serve. I wanted to be a part of the calling of our generation after what happened at 9/11 to make a difference. And then during that time, got really exposed to the military culture of physical training. And the culture is different in every branch and organization, even unit to unit. And I got involved with a lot of visit board search and seizure operations. We had to have a higher physical standard than your typical Navy crew. I was stationed on a guided missile cruiser. And we didn't have a lot, right? We didn't have a lot of resources. Our training facility on the board a guided missile cruiser, maybe somebody else out there has been on one of these things, is about the size of a closet. We had rusty weights that we hung over overheads with, we did pull-ups on rafters and did dips and ladder wells and did sit-ups on non-skid. And depending on the commanding officer, your chief or LPO, you occasionally had time to do physical training. But what really stuck with me was as I started to get more involved in this formally, I kind of got promoted into this role of what at the time they call a physical readiness coordinator. I think it's got a different name now. I think command fitness leader is the name, or it's evolved something past that. So I was in charge of training the crew with minimum education. And essentially you did what a lot of people did is you had really good outstanding scores. So naturally, if I give the type of training I've done and I give it to others, they should respond the same way. And big surprise, Coop, they didn't. Right. And
Right.
I was like,
Right.
wow, how come I'm giving you the same routine I'm doing? How come you're not getting the same results? And that frustrated me. And there's a quote that I want to kind of call back on as I think about this. Above the door that went into the gym that we had a couple treadmills, some basic equipment in, there was a sign, and our only real guidance, and this is part of the military paradigm we're hoping to evolve, was a good sweat is your best bet. And now looking back at it 20 years later, I realize how off that was and how terrible guidance it was. But that was the culture at the time. And that's all we knew is go out, do something that felt hard, and it must make you better in the way that you think it is. And no talk of consistency, no talk of progression, no talk of understanding planning. It was just go do something. And sometimes that helps you. If you're not doing anything, doing something is going to help you. But anyways, I went through my tour, did a couple deployments, didn't get to live out my dream of going to Buds like I wanted to for a lot of reasons, but decided I was going to go to college and was blessed with an incredible opportunity to go to an just amazing science-heavy school, University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, go Illini. Incredible undergraduate education, lots of coaching internship opportunities, lots of personal training, lots of science working in research labs, getting an incredible foundation of science, of physiology, which is really the bedrock of our profession. We have to be able to take that, we have to be able to apply it, teach it, make it real to the people we're working with and understand its limitations, but we got to understand the science. And Illinois did a great job of preparing me there. Moved forward from that, went to University of Georgia for my master's degree. Just another incredible experience, met lifelong mentors, partnerships there, really kind of specialized in strength and conditioning. And then landed my first job out of there. I wound up going to the Joint Forces Staff College, had an opportunity to be a contractor, leading the strength and conditioning program there in a joint service command, and got to meet just incredible people, just wonderful people from every branch of the service, up and coming officers, commanding officers, admirals, generals, and had to work in a program with extremely limited resources, right? And we achieved as a team incredible results. And through a lot of networking and hard work, and quite honestly, being the right place, the right time, wound up getting into more of the special operations community. Did that for 12 years. right? Strength and conditioning, and then wound up directing applied and sport data science, and then wound up getting back into conventional force settings. So it's been a wild ride, and I've been formulated by a lot of the mentors, the leaders, and just the different people, colleagues, and teammates I've interacted over the years. And to any of those that are out there that I've worked with, a massive thank you. I would not be where I am now without the challenges you presented me, the cooperation, the collaboration, the sweat we spent in the trenches trying to help people. So thank you all for that. And that's kind of the brief overview of kind of where I've been and where
Yeah.
I've come and where I'm at now. So
Beautiful. I love it, man. Thanks for sharing that, all that. I think one of the things I'm very curious about, after hearing you tell that story is like the education component and sort of like how you view that, in terms of your role. Like maybe a deeper question that I can ask here is like, what do you feel like you learned in the degree programs that was extremely useful? And what was like the stuff that you just had to do like entirely on your own, separate from those?
ooh, that is a heavy question, Coop. Let me take a swing at it, man. So I think about this a lot. I do a lot of informal mentorship for students and things like that. We often take our undergraduate for granted, man. You're a lot of it is you're trying to get through the content, you're trying to pass and advance and get out to get to the real world. And I think it's easy to be older now and say, oh, you took it for granted, go back and look at it. But if we can understand the basics of physiology, we can understand things like the SAID principle, understand how the body responds to stressors, basic physiological constructs. It allows us to understand, like, are the things that we're encountering in our career, are they biologically or physiologically plausible? So you can kind of throw the BS flag when you see something you're like, listen, I know that that violates what we know of physiology or training principles, and that allows you to be a better skeptic. Now, a lot of stuff that happens in the lab and a lot of the studies this science is based on, we could all poke holes in it, right? It's not perfect. The science of human performance is extremely messy. I think one thing we know more than now is just how much biological variability influences adaptation ability. And we could take to all the people on this podcast, we could deliver an incredible program. We can coach the heck out of it. It could be the best design program in the world, and 60% of the people will get better, 20% will get significantly better, and 20% will get significantly worse. And that's due to what God gave you through your parents. That's individual biological variability. It's also why it's so hard in this field, because that means there's a million ways to skin a cat, because so many different approaches work because of the different biological structures you're working with. So I think the undergraduate education and graduate studies help lay the foundation, but it's only the beginning. And for those of you in school out there, not to sound like some old cat, but like, it's only the beginning. If you leave school and think this is the last time you should be studying or reading or learning, you will
Good
be
luck.
short-sighting your career. I study and learn and read more books now than I ever did when I was in undergraduate and graduate school. I got 7 books I'm reading right now, constantly trying to find new ways to absorb knowledge, to learn from people, and then to see what actually works in the field. Because there's a difference between the lab and the applied setting. And that's a big struggle in our community too. We often fight about this a lot. There's a specific way to do something from a laboratory research perspective, a study design perspective, but then there's the realities of what works on the ground. And we often got to make compromises in both to really apply best evidence. And that's challenging, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I heard. No, I completely agree. And I think that's a great segue into really like the theme of this episode, you know what I mean? Which is obviously modernization and tactical human performance. So, like to start very broadly, I think it's important for you to define like what this topic really means. So that modernization element. And I think it's important to dive into the elements of like why we should care maybe as well, like
Mhm.
because for a lot of people this may not have a ton of context. So let's start there.
Yeah. And this is the heart of the conversation, Coop. Again, in my opinion, when it comes to like, well, why does it matter? We can't afford not to.
Mm-hmm.
Quite simply, we can't
Yeah.
afford not to. And let me paint the picture. That will kind of set the context, I think, for the conversation we can dig into. So when we look at right now of our population, what percentage of our population is ready to serve, eligible to serve? What do you think that is?
Oh shit, I would
Throwing a
say
question to you.
30%.
Okay, you're
Like,
close. Yeah, it's roughly around, I think, 23%.
oh,
Okay. So
worse than I
then,
think. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
right,
that
even
sucks.
worse.
Yeah.
And then of that 23%, what percentage do you think actually wants to serve in the
Oh
armed
God,
forces?
Mm.
Would
I
you
know
would you
Marine
say it's
Corps is
high or
less
low?
than 1% of
Right.
like,
So
so I would say 1% maybe of that.
yeah,
Like,
it's fractional, right? It's
yeah.
fractional. I don't know the exact number on that, but it's fractional, it's marginal. We have a talent issue, right?
Mhm.
Because of those population constraints we just talked about.
Yeah.
So we need to be even more effective at developing and sustaining the talent that we have in the military, our warfighters, which is our most precious capital, because we don't have the talent replenishment pools that you see in sport. There's no free agency, there's no transfer portal, there's no
Yep.
recruitment, right?
Yep.
There's no ability to have a bench. If you lose a leader who has a decade of experience, there's no guy who's ready to step into his spot to take that job without then decrementing the rest of the force. So
Hmm.
we have to play by a different set of rules. And all these programs out there in human performance have done a remarkable job. They've demonstrated incredible ROI and MOEs relating to these programs. But I think we're just scratching the surface on what we're capable of doing if we modernize our approaches. And I think that's where the critical nature is because we can't afford not to because we have a different talent model. It's not sport, right? And when we start thinking about this too, I want to be clear. In my opinion, modernization is not technology. When I say
Mm.
modernization, I'm not talking about technology. I'm not talking about analytics. I'm talking about foundationally changing how we think about solving problems. It's how we think as an integrated, operationally aligned human performance program. How do we think about solving problems? Are we reaching into our back pocket and relying exclusively on coach's eye and intuition? Are we just doing what we've always done? Are we just putting in the daily reps of just getting through the job because the work is so hard and we got a crazy athlete ratio? I think it is using data and technology to create a data informed culture that changes the way we think about solving problems and then aligning that operationally to the processes and procedures within the military and how they make decisions. I think that's what modernization is. And it often
Mm.
requires technology, requires performance analytics and things like that that we'll get into. But it's not just throw tech at a problem. And I think that the necessity of it also, there's a quote that I remember. I forget exactly who said it. I believe he was a previous Army chief of staff from 20 years ago, but he said, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. We
Mm.
have to change. We have to evolve. And there's an analogy, if I could share, that really I try to think about this a lot is if you think about just military technology in general, we go back to the early 1900s into the early 1940s before World War II really kicked off for the United States. How did we do operations back then? What was the primary mode of delivery of our soldiers? It was the horse, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cavalry based. We had tactics and generals and leaders who knew everything about a horse, how far a horse can go, the logistics, how much feed we have to have, how much water we have to have, tactics and strategy using horse-based cavalry. And then what happened? Well, we got into the modern warfare of World War II. We saw things like the Blitzkrieg. We developed armor. We developed mechanized infantry. And what didn't happen, Coop, is those generals, those colonels, those leaders, they didn't say, hey, I've been a horse guy my whole career, and this is what I'm going to keep doing.
Yeah.
No, they either did one of three things. They either retired because the times were changing and they couldn't keep up with it and adapt, and they stepped away. They either embraced it and evolved and adapted to modernization at that
Hmm.
time to embrace new technology, new approaches, new ways of thinking of solving tactical problems. Or the third thing is, unfortunately, they got bulldozed by the tank and the mechanized infantry. That's the point that I think we're at in this field is we need to make a decision to move forward together. And that comes with some change, which comes with some battling the status quo, comes with kind of dealing with some of these issues because the chaos of tactical, the ratios, the different allostatic factors that are impacting the people we're trying to take care of, they're all over the place, and we have a different talent model. Like I said at the beginning, we need to find new approaches that then we can embed within our culture, within our relationships, and truly operationalize these systems to be modernized in how we take care of the warfighter to help with readiness and lethality.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. I think that puts us in the right context. Now, you mentioned something kind of like a third or halfway through that I want to unpack a little bit, which is talking about modernization is not technology, although that is a component of it.
Yes.
And I'm going to kind of try to reiterate what you said. So tell me if I'm wrong, but it almost seemed like there was this element where data and technology can give you a floor, it can give you a ceiling. And then something else that I don't think you mentioned was like what took place between those things. So could you kind of like clarify the modernization that exists between the floor and ceiling element there?
Yeah. Can you get a little bit more specific? I'm losing you a little
Yeah,
bit of what your thought is.
sure. So I think it sounded like technology is something, maybe a better way to say this is like that gives you like a left and right boundary of like where you can and can't go with your athletes. And there's all these tools and things we can use. And obviously that's a component of modernization, right? But you said that it's not just technology. So I assume there's something taking place between the
Yeah.
boundaries that
I,
technology
I got you now,
places. And
brother.
I want to just clarify that.
Yeah, so it's really the operational alignment of decision making and problem solving. And let me use again, team. I'm gonna use a lot of analogies. I'm a very analogy heavy guy, but it
Yeah.
helps me think through how to explain things that are pretty complex. Let's use a car dashboard, right?
Okay.
And take a monitoring approach, right? Almost every one of us, maybe there's some crazy evil Knievels out there in the audience today and some of these other countries perhaps, but almost all of us drive a car that has a dashboard on it. We
Mhm.
do monitoring every single day. Our cars tell us how fast they're going, what their RPMs are, how many miles they have, when it's time to change the oil, when it's time to fill up the gas tank. Monitoring, in this case, technology on a dashboard, creates awareness. Now,
Mhm.
not all of us are car experts, though, right? So if I'm driving my car and I have all these indicators and that dreaded check engine light pops up, which happened to me a couple weeks ago, right? Everybody hates that. Maybe there
Yeah,
are
it
some car
sucks.
junkies out there. I'm not going to know how to fix my car, right?
Yep.
I'm going to go to a mechanic or find my buddy who's got a code reader and figure out what that code is and then figure out how to fix it. And that mechanic, or that SME in this case, is going to dig into the problem a little bit more, physically examine things. So when I get to like modernization, not just technology, the technology is creating awareness and it's driving us to the subject matter experts, aligning us to be able to solve problems. Hey, this is your O2 sensor. This is what's causing this issue. I know how to fix that, right? Technology by itself won't fix the problem.
Right.
Technology in the hands of SMEs, creating awareness, creating context to allostatic indicators that we could track and monitor, and then putting that power in the hands of human performance subject matter experts and leaders and commanders operationally aligned can help us solve a lot of the problems we have. But that's very different than the historical thinking we have in the military, where these things are often silo and disparate. We need to bring
Mhm.
it all together, and technology and data could be the medium via which the communication is facilitated. Does that kind of make sense? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that definitely does because and the reason I want to define that is because from the outside looking in, uh obviously there's like a huge tradition component to the broader United States military,
Mhm.
right? And like you said, right, I'm a horse guy. Where does that start to come at odds with this modernization component? But I also want to ask this as a twofold question. Like, there obviously tradition is like massive, massive in the military. So how is it like helpful as well? And
Yeah.
maybe we can talk about tradition a little bit before we get into comparing the two.
Yeah. And it's a great point, right? I do want to foot stomp though that I think the greatest risk with modernization is failing to try, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Failing to try is a much greater risk. Even though we're going to stumble along the way, we're going to make mistakes, we're going to ruffle feathers, we're going to have obstacles. That is a way greater risk than essentially not doing anything, right? So we need to try, even if it's going to be bumpy around the road, and it's going to take time, decades perhaps, to truly figure out, than to just stick our head in the ground, let the status quo persist because that's easier and quote unquote safer, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's just too much going on with these issues we're dealing with. We have to find better ways to solve the problem. When it comes to tradition, I think really tradition is tied to culture, right? And culture is important. And I agree with you, brother. Like There are pros and cons to every culture, and the culture in the military, it's different by every organization, every service branch, every unit. Every leader instills a different type of culture in his organization. And there are good things and there are bad things about culture, right? There are, I think, when I think about just in general across the military, I think one of the greatest things is the culture of winning in our military. The
Hmm.
people in our military are passionate about defending our country, about following the orders of those appointed over them, about doing the things necessary to ensure that they're successful on the battlefield, that they're taken care of, that they support their families and they support their country. The work ethic piece. Typically, I mean, again, it's going to vary by unit and by person by person, by warfighter. But the work ethic that I've seen, I'm very impressed with, right? And oftentimes, though, the double edged sort of that is when it comes to culture, sometimes that creates friction point because your culture might be, we're going to work really hard. But if we're working really hard on the wrong things, that doesn't help us.
Yeah.
We want to work hard on the right things, the right way. We want to leverage that culture to take us to the outcomes we care about, not to just leverage the culture to say we're hard and tough. And I
Hmm.
think that's sometimes where the swag comes. And then training smarter doesn't mean making things easier. It means being more strategic, more informed, preferably using data to figure out how we could be tougher and train harder, right? And when not to, when to leverage recovery, when to really step back, and when to push. And again, that's just a paradigm shift because it's typically not the way we've done things in the military, right? And we
Hmm.
rely on the
Yeah.
heritage. This is what happened to me before me. This is what my NCO did to me. Going back to that sign at the very beginning of the conversation, I said above the gym is a good sweat is your best bet. That was the culture. And
Hmm.
we
Completely.
know as performance professionals, that's not the that's not the culture we want. We want to essentially be able to create a culture of training, not working out. And I think that's a huge difference. I don't think our service members, our warfighters, really understand all the time the difference between working out versus training and the different approaches responsible. We want to create a culture of training that is specific to the military, that's flexible to each unit, that's aligned with commander's intent operationally, that does the right things to help those units be successful for a very long time without running guys into the ground because we don't have the talent to replace them. And I think that's where culture kind of rubs with tradition. And then how it applies to modernization. And maybe let me ask you this, right? Do
Hmm.
you find that oftentimes there's a lot of camps in our profession? You're either
Yeah.
I'm a coach or I'm somebody who looks at data,
Yeah. And I mean, a
right?
million things between, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I personally, I can't stand it. I don't understand it.
Yeah.
Using a modernized approach and using data to inform your process does not prohibit you from being a coach. I'm going to say that again. You could be a
Please.
coach and have relationships and be on the floor and coach and interact and still use data and still
Yeah.
consult processes.
Yeah.
It's not like
These are
I go
not
do
either
this and I'm
or
not a coach
things,
anymore.
right? You can do both and.
It's not an either or, right?
Yeah.
And I know there's different philosophies out there, and I respect them. I respect all my colleagues' opinions in this area, and I respect all the different approaches. And however, I just think it's a silly argument that the real answer
I
is to be a
agree.
hybrid, is to be in
Yeah.
the middle, to be able to use this stuff to operationalize it in our process to make us better, to improve our coach's eye, to help us see things that maybe our own bias wouldn't have picked up on. We all have biases, right? And there's only so much information we could pick up. You know this, the ratios in tactical, they're not good, right?
Yeah.
They're not good. So if I'm in front of a formation of potentially hundreds of warfighters, there is no way I could have a personal relationship and know what's happening with every single one of them, especially if
Exactly.
they're geographically dispersed. Can't, no
Yeah.
matter how good I am. But we could take monitoring approaches that create some of that awareness, that cut through the chaos, help us find consistency in the chaos. And I think this is where I'm getting at with modernization. We just have to grow and evolve as a field. And I think where it really struggles is when you see pockets that implement and pockets that don't in the same organizations. Is now you create camps. This is the
Hmm.
camp that just wants to train. Okay, well,
Yeah.
this camp wants to train and use data. If that's having better outcomes for us, that should be the overall process because that's how we change the culture.
Yep.
By just settling for the status quo because that might be what the culture wants, it doesn't help us move the needle forward. We have to kind of nudge it. And I think that's where we could be more aligned as an enterprise, just in my opinion.
And I mean, I feel like that falls back on on a basis of science as well. Like when I think about dynamic systems theory, assuming, you're
Mhm.
familiar, like would we not want to have coaches that kind of know what every system is going under from a stress perspective, not necessarily just be siloed to like, hey, I'm a nutritionist, so all I give a shit is the digestive systems, right? Like, function, or hey, I'm a psychologist, so I only care about these people's like, nervous systems in the context of emotional regulation and so on and so forth. Like, but I also like think that I have a question. Like, while that I feel like to me it's obvious that we'd want to know at least a little bit about everything. Like, at what point has someone lost the plot, so to speak, on their particular role
Yeah,
within an organization?
you got to dial things in. You got to make things specific to the domain of expertise. We want to remember we often have these teams that we say are interdisciplinary, but we really operate multidisciplinary, which means you have all the domains and SMEs, but they all operate completely in silo. And that's due
Yeah.
to the cultures, the operational constraints, the time and all that, and really the ratios that force us into those buckets. But what I'm really getting at is we even want to go a step beyond interdisciplinary. We want to get to transdisciplinary, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's where the real ROI is in the industry. That's where the real benefits are going to come from. And I think to your point, like if you're a strength and conditioning coach, I got to look at things that matter to a strength and conditioning coach. I got to look at them in a manner that's simple and easy to understand, that can inform me.
Mm-hmm.
But I also got to be willing to say, hey, like this data is telling me something that maybe I'm not comfortable with. It doesn't mean I have to necessarily trust the data blindly, but
Yeah.
I need to be willing to then interrogate my process,
Mm.
leverage my relationships, go communicate with people, have
Yeah.
conversations, say, hey, I'm seeing this trend in the data. You tell me what's going on here. You okay? What's
Yeah.
going on in this formation? What's
And
going on with
that's where
this
the
union?
sports scientists, so to speak,
Yeah.
like to use like some out of the military terms, probably can like come in and really educate, right?
Hmm.
And vice versa, right? And it's like that process of like challenging opinions and being humble enough to like ask a true expert like what's going on, right? That's probably where we start to be surprised by like what we're finding and learn more as a group, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I agree. I think data can help remove our bias, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it could check us as long, again, given that we have good quality data that's trustworthy, that we've validated, that we understand its limitations and reliability and completeness. We don't do
Mm-hmm.
enough good with that in general with our just data wrangling and validation aspects, right? In our industry, we got to clean that up so we could actually trust what we're looking at. We have to have universal processes. We have to have enterprise solutions, all these
Yeah.
types of things that don't leave this type of communication to chance. Right
Yeah.
now, it's very much if you're the interested coach in this, you're going to go dig on this, but you're one of many. So
Yeah.
the momentum's going to be limited. We need to institutionalize these processes, in my opinion. And I think sometimes too, like, let's just acknowledge that there might be people on this call that are like, BS, Joe. That's garbage. I don't need any of that. It's not valuable to me. And I've heard this before. And again, I'm going to throw another horse analogy at you, ironically.
Please hit me.
Yeah, I'm sure we've all heard the adage, you could bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink,
Of course.
right? Another one I've heard is that if people find it valuable, they'll do it. I don't agree
Mm.
with that because I think, like thinking about the horse to water analogy, that water is valuable. If that horse doesn't drink that water, it's going to die. Because the horse doesn't value the water in that moment doesn't make the water any less valuable. It means you have a stubborn horse, right?
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes what happens is we have a lot of reluctant leaders or we have stubborn horses. And that creates frictions on teams and organizations. And we need to be able to push through that with processes that become forcing functions to help us evolve the culture and to modernize to get past the horse, right? And somebody once told me, I told them an analogy, and they said, yeah, you know what the answer to that is? You drag the horse in the water, you make them drink, right? And I don't know if that's always the right answer, right? And I'm not saying we
Let's
need to
anyway.
force things. But I
Yeah.
think leadership engagement, leadership example,
Yeah.
showing the benefits of these things, calling out contrast to different approaches and saying, hey, this is your approach. This is this other approach. This one's working way better statistically. I think you
Mm-hmm.
need to change. And then using that to slowly move the culture in a way that everybody can ingest it and have collaborative buy-in because on these teams and organizations, like that's the other thing that we got to do is these can't just be good ideas that come up from ivory towers, right? They have to be things that are sourced in the truth on the ground where we give stakeholders a chance to create buy-in on these different units and teams and they could contribute to the conversation. Help to your point, how is it relevant to me? What's in it for me? we need to ask them, right? Wherever we're implementing modernization protocols in the military, talk to the people closest to the problems, the commanders, the human performance teams, and let them help solve it for you. Bring them into it. Because no matter how much any of us might be smart on this stuff, the people that are doing the work, the coaches, the dietitians, the sports medicine practitioners, the warfighters and leaders, like they're the ones that you got to get buy-in from. You got to talk with them, right? You gotta have
Yep.
them help shape it, if that makes sense, in
Mm.
my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense, and to kind of, I think, maybe tie a little bit of a bow on the battle between, like, tradition and modernization. One thing I heard in the Marine Corps that always, like, really stuck out to me, was a heuristic of, like, know thy enemy. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And, like, understand them intimately well. And one thing that I was told was, like, when it was World War II and the Axis powers were taking a look at the Army, the Marine Corps, and, like, specifically, like, infantry in that context, they were like, look, like, this enemy, right? Us being, their enemy, is nigh impossible to plan for, because they have this book of doctrine, the traditions that they've followed for years and years and years, and they will arrive at a battlefield and not do a single fucking thing that's in that book. So I almost feel like this, element of modernizing fast, being able to pivot is, like, very true to our like, that is the tradition. You know what I mean? Is to
Yeah.
evolve. It is the tradition to surprise people, right? And throw new variables out there and, like, embrace these elements of chaos. I want to understand from your perspective, right? The stubbornness element, the lack of desire to change, both kind of on the weight room floor and from the powers that be, that are, like, maybe more of, like, a command structure, that are like, what are the blockers that you face on either side of this thing, that you feel like you have to iterate on? And this is obviously, like, your opinion on that.
Well, yeah, this is strictly my opinion, and I think the other thing is it's also going to be very different in every organization, right?
Yeah.
Every agency, every unit. Are you an
Mm-hmm.
operational unit? Are you a training command? Like, there's going to be different, intents there, different cultures, different restraints and constrictions. So I haven't worked everywhere. I don't want to
Yeah, of course.
misrepresent, the vast field of this enterprise. But I think, like, a lot of it comes down to, and the coaching floor, it's
Mm-hmm.
often ratios and times, it's flows, it's we got a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people to work with. We don't have the predictability of schedule the way that we do in sport. And I got to just get these guys through. I got to try to give them a good training session, a good training experience, a good stimulus. I don't have time to mess with this other stuff. Then,
Yeah.
like, our warfighters going to have phones on them. We're going to have Wi-Fi in facilities. There's infrastructure and connectivity issues that are barriers. And there's
Mm-hmm.
also barriers just with the subject matter expertise of the particular coach. Like, you might be a coach who's been around for 20, 30 years. You've been whiteboarding stuff your whole career. Why should I
Yeah.
learn how to do something digitally? Why should I learn how to take them? It worked for me where I was before. It's worked for me here. I've done a good job. I understand that argument. But again, that status quo holds us back from evolving. Like, we got to be willing to crack a few eggs to make an
Mm-hmm.
omelet, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
know that might rub some folks the wrong way, but I truly believe that we have to be willing to step forward into something unknown that's hard to learn and understand, and go through the growth pains, because we know it's going to give us better efficiency, better outcomes, better effectiveness down the road, even though it's going to be challenging to get there. And I might have to perhaps get out of my comfort zone a little bit. And I think that's part of it. I think the other thing is just from the military cultures, it's challenging, right? The military's
Mm-hmm.
busy. They got a lot of stuff going
Oh
on.
yeah. Yeah.
There's layers of those leadership and organization, different echelons. They have a very dangerous, hard job to do. And I don't know if we truly, again, going back to what is modernization, it's operationalizing human performance in a way that we could be more data informed, right? And to do that means we have to integrate these systems into the way the military thinks. And right now, as human performance has delivered incredible ROIs and MOEs, these programs are tremendously effective. There's lots of research on that. You can go read it. It's phenomenal. But I think we're leaving meat on the bone, because a lot of these commanders and units, they're happy to have human performance, but it's not aligned like the way we typically see it aligned in high performance sport, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not part of the day-to-day operating culture. It's not part of the reason why we're winning games is because of our preparation physically, right? And we
Yeah.
just need to acknowledge that more. It's not a knock on it. It's just something we can get better at. We have to align better. And again, that comes with like learning what our commanders want us to do, integrating, aligning, making efficient processes is part of the game for that too. But at the end of the day, we need these programs to provide competitive strategic advantage. That's critical to winning.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like think about the birth of our profession, strength and conditioning, right? Where did a lot of it come from, right? It came from Boyd Epley back in the
Yep.
days with Cornhusker
Freaking
strength.
basement with carpet. Like,
Yeah. And
you
what
know,
happened is they won a couple national championships, and
yeah,
the head coach
like
got up
that
there.
year. Yeah.
Yeah. And they
That
said,
fucking year.
"Why did you win?" He said, "Because we were stronger." And then it
Yeah.
was an arms race for strength and conditioning.
Yes. Yes.
Are we going to see leaders credit their human performance teams for winning, for being prepared for battles? Right. That's the
Yeah.
type of stuff like, and I'm not saying that's the right answer. I'm saying that's the disconnect where sometimes these programs are viewed as supplemental, nice to have,
Fuck.
almost
Yeah. I've never
recreational
heard that. That's
entities.
awesome.
And I just think
Yeah.
that we could move more towards operational criticality and alignment. And I think that that's where we need to go, in my personal opinion. And I think we're moving in that direction.
I love that. Well, I love that because, you really can use that Nebraska, Boyd Epley story in a lot of places, like the 0 to 1 moment, of where there were no programs, so nobody was getting stronger. And then there were like programs at every Big Ten and SEC school within that decade of it first being there, right? And then every team, across the world, if they're worth their salt, they have some sort of like meaningful program there. So,
It's even more
yeah,
important for us, going back to the talent discrepancy
yeah,
issue, right?
yeah,
We can't replace talent
no,
with the way that they can in sport. We don't have
hell
developmental
no.
leagues,
Yeah.
right? So we need to be even more efficient, even more effective at how we sustain our most precious capital, which is the warfighter. Make sure they're prepared to do the things that they need to do. And I
Mhm.
think that screams to a slightly different model, a different alignment theory, and it absolutely emphasizes the need to modernize our approach.
I love that. I love that. Now, okay, so I feel like you're talking about operational alignment a lot, and I think that that's something that we should kind of dig into. So let me think about this question for a second. There are outputs, and I'm not going to ask you to define what those are, but I'll throw some out there that I'm aware like kind of exist, right? There's efficiency of a CQB team, which is close quarters, related combat stuff. There's dive team efficiency. There's, all these little tasks that are really important to a mission that you can get good at. And in my context, I sort of view that as the sport specific training, right? That I think like operators have to go under, and I'll use them kind of as my context here. Like you are going to have to ruck, you are going to have to run, you are going to have to do CQB, you are going to have to engage at all these different distances with the enemy as well, right? There's all these things that go into making a war fighter that is good. Now, again, not asking you to define exactly what those KPIs are and what they look like, but what I am going to ask is how on a modern like gym floor in the tactical setting are we thinking about programming and coaching to deliver that outcome? And maybe, and if this is too specific, let me know, but like what is the best way to get a commander to buy into that element?
Yeah, I'm going to take the first one. I might, out of
Yeah,
respect, punt on the second one.
that's fine.
I
Yeah.
just want to stay within the scope here. But the first one, I want to preface this, right? Relationships, they're the foundation of coaching, right?
Yep.
So everything we do, it's education, it's building relationships, it's being there with the warfighter. That's critical. That should never go away. I'm not advocating for any of that to go away.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this kind of gets into a little bit of the coaching piece, versus the programming piece, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think we can kind of unpack this and get to maybe some commonality, some truth here. For one, I don't think we give our field enough credit, team, right? So, my brother, I don't know if he's listening. He's an engineer. He works in oil and gas. He deals with very, very complex undersea structures, pumps, temperatures, pressures, steel, things of that nature. Very controlled things. When you look at the confidence intervals around the strength of steel at certain depths, it's very tight. Like those R squareds are very high, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Humans aren't like that.
Yeah,
We are, as I said at the beginning, incredibly biologically diverse and variable. That influences almost, I think it's up to 60% of our training response comes from our individual genetic variability.
it's crazy. Yeah.
Other allostatic factors, stress from home, financial stress, training load, sleep, nutrition. I got to plan for a trip. I got to go to the range. I just got yelled at by my NCO. All these other factors influence how a warfighter responds to training amongst a host of others that we're not even going to get into, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we don't give ourselves enough credit to the complexity of the task that we're trying to solve. And honestly,
Yeah.
like I've said this before, I don't think we should be called human performance or strength and conditioning. I think really the true answer to elevate our field is to call us physiological engineers and make it a STEM degree.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what we are. We're dealing with complex structures that a lot of engineers would bang their head against the wall, being like, "What do you mean I can't
Oh God.
model this?" I'm
Yeah.
happy when I
Right.
see R squared that are like 0.05
Yeah.
because I explained 5% of the variance in a complex system. So like it is a way tougher task. And you go listen to some of the research, listen to some of the applied research coming out of this space on like weightlifting derivatives and force transfer and some of these other topics. And you can see just how complex this thing gets. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
as simple as just pick things up, put them down. And I don't think we give ourselves enough credit as an industry, as a field, as a profession. And I think we need to change that to give us more credibility to stand on when we talk with authority about how we prepare. That's point number one. When it comes to coaching or programming, which is part of this conversation, right? You need both. And I'm gonna throw another analogy out there to the team, right? I told you I was gonna come with a bag, right?
Hit us.
Let's say we're trying to build a skyscraper, right?
Okay.
We have a goal to build a really, really tall building.
Yep.
We don't just show up on the construction site with a bunch of equipment, a bunch of skilled laborers, construction workers, uh, and build. In this case, the construction workers are the coaches, people doing the
Yeah.
work on the floor.
Yeah.
You have an architectural plan, you have an engineering diagram, you have something that is going to help ensure that the product you're building, from a coaching perspective in this case, actually turns out to what you want it to be. If you just gave all the tools to the construction folks and told them to go build a massive skyscraper, given the complexity I've already talked about with biological variability of the human condition, you're not going to get anywhere. So you need both. Again,
Yeah.
the programming aspect is critical to enable the coach to then execute the program. And the program needs to be flexible. The chaos of tactical is changing all the time. I don't want to get into this. I know other folks have recently, and I loved it. I don't think periodization, the way that it works in classical sports setting, works very well in tactical. I don't. I'll fight
Amen.
that. I agree with that statement. And because I think periodization naturally implies a deliberate peaking period for an intended competition window that is often very finite. That's the only reason it doesn't work.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
What
Totally.
we need is sequenced, planned training that is flexible to the changing environment, flexible to the inputs we're getting from allostatic monitoring, flexible to the shifting changes and needs of the formation that we're working with, the leadership intent, but that helps us make sure we're staying very concurrent and very general physical preparation. That's the other challenge we
Mm-hmm.
have, right? So, and you know this, and most of the audience does too, but I'll just reiterate it. We don't know what the battlefield's going to be like in the military. We
Oh
don't
no.
have the
No.
luxury of knowing where we're going to fight next year, or even if you're on a deployment, you don't know where and when you're going.
Yeah.
You might even be on a cycle and like you're standing by to go do something, but then what happens? Like you might not ever do it. You might go do your year-long deployment and just sit there and never even go do anything. We don't have a defined season. We don't have an off season. We don't have known operational constructs very well that we could forecast. And so that makes a lot of these other approaches that work potentially really well, especially in Olympic sport,
Mm-hmm.
where the constraints are less and it's very, very known fixed outcomes that are very, very linear. It makes it very hard to apply in tactical. So we need this flexible programming approach driven by great relationships and coaching, consistently informed by data to
Mm-hmm.
make adjustments because this is going to go all over the place. So again, if we're trying to navigate the chaos and find consistency through the chaos, monitoring is our best approach to that. Is it's going to help us capture some of those allostatic indicators that we don't have the ability to capture at mass and scale due to the ratios we're dealing with. This is
Yeah.
an efficiency thing for us as well as an awareness advantage for us. And we got to lean into this, right? We can't
Yeah.
just rely on having conversations. Now you follow up monitoring with conversations. You go be a coach after you have better information, right?
Mm.
But we can't just use solely our coach's eye and talking to people in the facility. We should
Yeah.
use this to facilitate better communication, to tweak and adjust our programming strategy. I'm a big believer in concurrent training in this population, big believer in hitting all the major buckets and efficiencies and capacities associated with general physical preparation.
Hmm.
Could there be a time and place very specifically for some very specific prep? Yes. But I think that is few and far in between for most settings in the military. We need to train consistently. We need to have good movement quality. We need to be progressive in our approach and we need to be planned, but we have to be willing to modify and flex that plan based upon all the chaos that the military is
Hmm.
going to fall on us. Now, that doesn't mean we don't plan. Again, going back to the challenge, it doesn't mean we say, hey, we're not going to do this. We're just going to walk into the facility, write something on the whiteboard from the seat of our pants that I programmed today. That's, in my opinion, it's ineffective. It's
Yeah.
almost unethical in a lot of ways, right? And I'll give you another analogy. My wife, we had our daughter over 5 years ago, and she had an unplanned C-section, and so we were in the hospital for like 4 days. And as much as I hated it, the nurse would come in periodically throughout the night, and they would check her vitals, right? They had a little subjective pain survey they gave her. And all these types of monitoring tools helped them figure out what doses of medication they're going to get my wife to deal with her pain. They didn't
Mm.
just come in and wing it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Other
Hell no.
professions
Yeah.
don't do it either. We need to evolve our approach and stop just winging it and be a little bit more data informed, a little bit
Yeah.
more modernized in the approach that we use to solve problems. Align that with our commander's intent to make sure we're accomplishing the things we need to do and understand it's not going to be perfect. It's not straightforward. Human performance is not linear. It's not, adaptations are not linear. The stressors that are going to hit our forces, we don't know when they're going to happen all the time. We have to be flexible, and monitoring helps us to identify those gaps and let us know where we're going a little bit better than just doing it by the hip. So,
Yeah. Interesting. With what you're saying kind of about like taking a concurrent approach and like this element of nonlinearity we have to account for. I think a lot of coaches and one of them being Stu McMillan, he's kind of the head guy over at Altus. Really, I mean, probably the best track, and field coach like of our era. He talks about just like loving the beauty of track because it is so objective. You know what I mean? Because it is literally like that day, who was the fastest? And I think Louis Simmons even, was like, I like powerlifting because it's that number, right? And we can apply periodization to this to get, this like result. And it just takes time to sort of get there. So it seems like in the tactical setting, you are like on the like complete opposite side of that coin, right? Like you could not be further away. Like there is no objective like that we could add 500 pounds to this guy's squat. Is that going to like help? I like not necessarily. So like what are some of these like minimum thresholds that you're talking about from like a programming perspective, from a health perspective, that like these tactical athletes need to be in, right, in
yeah,
order to face that nonlinearity?
yeah, I think I can't answer that question reliably for the entire military, right?
Of
So
course, of
it
course. Yep.
varies very differently by unit, by goal, by the mission of these units and organizations, by the training age
Yep.
of those particular warfighters. Some warfighters very minimum training age. Others might have been previous Division I athletes that are really,
Yeah.
really robust in their physical capacities, need to get pushed more, right? And again, I'm not saying that other methods like conjugate or block can't work in tactical.
Of
I
course.
think everything's a tool, right? I'm just saying true periodization implies a peak for a
Hmm.
specific window. And then
Yeah.
after that peak is often a crash because you can't hold peak very long.
Hell no. Yeah.
And my mentors have taught me this, like once you've peaked, you're going to crash. And when you crash, that compromises readiness. So we don't want to peak a lot in the military,
Never.
right?
Yeah.
Because we're trying to constantly keep the bar relatively high. Now, in terms of individual KPIs, I think it's very service branch specific. And honestly, I think there's a lot of gaps in this area. Like, what
Mm.
is strong enough in the military? What is fit enough aerobically? Part of the problem is like we have job task needs analysis where we could look at particular jobs and things like that. And we
Yep.
get close to, okay, from a training perspective, But the moving target is the operational reality that we never know what it's going to be. So it'd be
Yep.
like, hey, we're going to look at, let's use football as an example, right? We could look at offensive linemen. We could look at the type of offense we're going to run. We expect to play this many plays. We're up tempo offense, so we know we have a little bit higher conditioning demand on that particular offensive line. We know they need to be able to overcome resting inertias. They got to have very, very, very good first step explosive speed and lateral speed to be able to block on the perimeter. All these qualities. We know they need to be a certain size, right? We don't have that luxury in the military. Our warfighters come in every shape and size. It's nearly impossible to benchmark and profile a warfighter for a particular job, right? I
Hmm.
think most of us would agree with that. You think about anywhere you've ever worked, you got big guys, little guys, small guys, fast guys, strong guys, everything in between. And they're still successful at their job. And we don't have the luxury of knowing that we're going to play on a 100-yard field for 4 quarters, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
With X amount of time on a play clock.
Open air
Again, this is,
stadium, right? We are like, but
yeah,
we don't know where the seats begin for
and this is
sure.
no knock on sport, brother. I have
Yeah.
nothing but
No.
tremendous respect for all my high performance sports colleagues and what
Yeah.
they're chasing with championships and player longevity issues in the same regard. It's commendable. But the military is a different beast because we don't know what the game's going to be.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that means that we have to prepare for virtually everything without over specializing in any one physiological attribute.
Yeah.
And we have to do it in a way that doesn't get monotonous, doesn't get boring, doesn't lose warfighter buy-in. We got to find ways to be flexible, to give some autonomy back to the warfighter, to leverage our
Just
relationships.
complex, man. Yeah, this is a
Yeah,
nonlinear
that's what I'm
system by
saying.
definition. Yeah.
It's total chaos. And I know the people out there that are listening like can appreciate this because I imagine many are from the tactical sector. But those who aren't, it is way different than sport, not to mention all the cultural things we've talked about, and some of that barriers and obstacles there. So what we're
Hmm.
trying to do, it's an extremely hard problem, right?
Yeah.
And you often also like just like in sport, you have the great measuring stick is wins and losses and individual
Yeah.
player statistics and availability statistics, right? It's tied to money and earnings. So like it's very easy at the end of a season to say, was it a success or not? That is not the case in the military.
Hell no.
We don't have a seasonality approach. We don't measure wins and losses and operations and put them up on a board on a conference standing sheet, right? It's not the same thing. So we can't even really define how these outcomes that are important with us actually translate into the battlefield area. That's a gray space. That's probably a fool's errand to even try to figure out because there's too many confounders, too many unknowns. You can't
Hmm.
measure that. It's
Hmm.
easier to do in sports. So you bring in a new performance program, a new high performance director, a new head coach. He changes the culture instantly, and you go from winning 2 games to 10 games. That's a success.
Yeah.
It's very hard to measure how these things are successful at that high level view in the military because of all those constraints. And we don't know
Hmm.
when we're going to play the next game.
Yeah.
Imagine telling an athlete, you're going to prep year round, and all we're going to do is train. We might play, we might not. We're just going to train
That's
year
yeah,
round.
that's a fucking crazy, right? Like an
How many
NFL player
athletes
I
would
feel
stay
like
in
would go
sport?
insane. Yeah, they would never stay doing that. Yeah, they would lose their marbles for sure.
And
That's a
that's a
great way of
testament to
putting
the
it.
military culture you asked earlier. That is a
Yeah.
testament that these warfighters can pick it up every day and keep
Yep.
going through it,
Yeah.
going through it for their brothers
For
and
something
and
that
and,
may never happen.
and going through for their country and staying ready. And that is a
Yeah.
huge piece of our culture that is very, very important that we got to embrace. We just need to give
Yeah.
it some guidance and nudge it the right way to make it even better. Right. And I think that's the challenge we're dealing with, man. It's this field, it's so rewarding, but it's
Hmm.
so challenging. And a lot of
Yeah.
it has to do with that nonlinearity and all the chaos. And I think, again, going back to why modernization can help us, monitoring can help kind of shed some light on the chaos. It's more
Yes.
important. And I've had this argument at college before said, oh, it's more important to monitor in sport because we have a defined season. I'm sorry, I respectfully disagree. I think it is more important to monitor in tactical because of all the chaos
Yeah.
because there's way more unknowns. You have
Yeah.
got to have systems and processes to help to capture that because it's so much more not linear.
Well,
It's so much more.
let's dive into that because I think we, the answer to this chaos and nonlinearity is that there is no answer. But, right, what is becoming clearer through analytics and through the data? Because that sounds like something that you're heavily engaged with is like, but where can we turn those stones over and how can we leverage that? So dive into that. I want to know more
Yeah,
about
it's
that.
it's context, brother.
Yeah.
Context is king, right? I gave a talk
Yep.
on that a couple years ago, but context and awareness.
Yep.
If you could, again, going back to the dashboard in your car, if you had no dashboard in your car, you have no idea when that check engine light pops on until your car breaks.
Yeah.
So for those of you who are like, hey, the heck with monitoring, you're driving a car with no dashboard and you're going to wait for it to catch fire.
Yeah.
Is that what we want to do? Do you want to wait for
Usually
it to run
no.
out of gas, or do you want to have a primer that says, hey, I should probably fill up my tank? Right. That's where analytics can help us, right? Analytics can help us kind of find patterns we can't normally see with our own eye. They
Mhm.
can help shed a light on this. They can help reduce uncertainty, give us some clarification on which way we're going. Again, this all depends on whatever, system or approach you're using. Is it designed the right way? Is it intuitive? Is it efficient? Is it relevant to the role that you brought up earlier? These are a lot of challenges when it comes to like the implementation of these things that we got to make sure we get right. But better awareness in the hands of really good coaches and practitioners is going to lead to better decision making, right?
Yeah.
There's no
Yeah.
no
Yeah. Yeah.
argument against that I could see. Like if you have better information, better awareness, and you're a good coach or you're a good dietitian or a good physical therapist or whatever your role is in this
Yeah.
sector, you're going to make a better decision on how to prepare, sustain, rehab, or develop that warfighter that you're working
Yeah.
with,
You'd never like take away an EKG from a cardiologist.
right?
Like ever.
Or does a cardiologist walk into surgery and go, take all the sensors off. I'm just winging this.
Going off
Anesthesiologist, we're
vibes
just winging it. We're
today.
not looking at vitals. I've been doing
Yeah.
this for 20 years. I know what I'm doing. And maybe there are some doctors out there that do that kind of stuff. I don't want
Yeah.
to have
Cool if
surgery
you
with that
could.
guy.
I doubt it
So
though. Yeah.
again, we need to elevate our
Yeah.
field, right? We need to raise our standards of how we do things to get better outcomes. We can't and outcomes we're getting are really good, but we want to
Yeah.
get more, right? We know
Of
there's
course.
still meat on the bone. And I think that's really important, and as we kind of like move forward too, with that more machine learning and artificial intelligence type stuff, I think we're going to have more opportunities, but there's risk there too, right? We have to take the time to really provide the right governance, the right data structure, the right fidelity around these types of advanced models to make sure that
Hmm.
we're not getting into erroneous decisions, right? I'm not being misled by these types of systems. And that takes a lot of system maturity, data maturity. It takes a more of an empowered and understanding of how to deal with data. And I think right now those are big gaps across the whole military that we need to fill. But I think that AI will help us. It should never replace a coach. It should never replace a practitioner. I'll die on that
Hmm.
horse. Like I
Me
think it could
too.
help them. If you were to tell me that AI could help me get a training program down to the 90th percent that would have taken me, let's say, an hour, and it could do it in 5 minutes or less, and then I can go in there and make some tweaks, adjust it the way I want, put human context to it, make sure it's doing. Maybe you could even use other data elements, say, hey, I'm trying to accomplish these things based upon the training profile of this particular warfighter or group of
Hmm.
warfighters. And it could build the program for me. I review it, I go in, I notice things, I change it, and I send it out, and I can get out there and coach it, communicate it, talk to it. That's a win for everyone. I
Yeah.
think that's where we can be. We're not there yet. And again, trying to make those enterprise processes versus just particular units doing their own thing their own way. I think we got to try to standardize, but also have some flexibility in order to do
Hmm.
what we want to do with data across the greater enterprise. I think that's really critical because right now it's everybody doing whatever they want to do in their own
Yeah.
way, and it makes it very hard to share information, to share best practices, or even to share, unified data pictures across
Yeah.
organizations because everybody
Yeah,
has
because
their own thing.
there's no set of standards, right? And maybe I'll use an example of like one person's using Hawkins force plates and others using Vald force plates. One's using output VBT and others using perch VBT, right? And like how different all that becomes. So what you're saying is like we're getting clearer at like what the standard could be for X, Y, and Z types of units, right? But we haven't necessarily mastered that full spectrum of data and like what input or what outputs we need to see to make that universal head to toe in the military.
Yeah, we're an iceberg right now, Coop,
Yeah.
right? We see
Yep.
the potential of the top, but
Yep.
we have to change the culture underneath us so that it's one that is more of this operationally aligned, modernized, data-informed culture so we could bring that iceberg up and out of the water to really
Yeah.
bear the fruit of its entire shape, right?
Yep.
Technology, again, without culture is going to produce little value. right?
Yep.
So we can't just spend money on things. We need to spend money on education. We need to spend money on expertise. We need to align it. We need to put it into place. And those are the types of things that will take us to the next level, I think. And I think
Yeah.
that's, again, going back to the whole topic, that's what modernization is.
Okay. Okay. I like that. Because I think now it begs the question of you have infinite money. What technology are you going to try to, create? Like, what would you need to measure that we can't measure right now?
Infinite money and resources. I
Yeah.
love those types of questions. Again, this is all my personal opinion stuff, but
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest gaps that we're going to see, like just in general, is right now we rely a lot upon like things like surveys and questionnaires. It's great.
Mm.
Qualitative data is fantastic. But any of you out there who've worked with this type of data understand how hard it is to get compliance, right? It's
Yeah.
very
Oh
hard to
my
be
God. Yeah.
compliant.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we have an incredible industry, again, not endorsing anything of wearable sensors and devices, that the validation of these technologies is getting better and better and better. I think we need to lean into that personally. I think we need to think about how do we safely, ethically, and operationally equip units with those types of technologies at scale
Hmm.
so that we don't have to rely upon manual inputs and we can gather a lot of information on recovery, training loads, both external and internal, sleep, recovery, physiology, and tie these things in to be able to then put that information in front of subject matter experts who preferably have performance science analytics expertise, which is another missing piece, but to help to solve these problems and align them with the leadership to be able to do that. So I think right now money is a big factor for things, right? And that's the other thing is like if we're going to modernize, I think it's also naive of us to think it's not going to cost. This is
Oh
expensive
God.
stuff
Yeah.
because again,
Yeah.
technology and data infrastructure becomes the medium via which we change the culture and inform things, right? So it's going to cost money. There's no way around it. And I know right now, not getting into budget stuff, but like, there's everything has a cost and it comes with a compromise, right? So
Yeah.
those are decisions, way above my pay grade. And I'm not going to get into that. But like, I think that if I had unlimited money and I was the one
Yeah.
making those
Yeah. Yeah.
decisions,
Yeah.
we would pursue, some type of strategy to do the right thing in that regards to like wearable technology in the right way. And I think that would really help us to have a more universal picture of what's going on with all of our warfighters.
Yeah. Because I view it as like if someone could have the Aura Ring, the Garmin watch, like, plus the heart rate strap, if they could have, those three pieces of tech kind of on all the time and it was monitoring HRV, sleep scores, it was putting all that like yeah, you're right. I would never have to ask them to fill out their weekly check-in form or their daily log. Which it's so funny too because that matters so much to like I think if we think about the calculus of this stuff, like a really really bad stressful day, right, is going to like significantly impact someone's ability to perform in the weight room. That's also probably the day they're like not as likely to fill out the goddamn form.
Yeah, and like it's trends too. It's not
Yeah,
overreacting to, daily function. I mean, we're all gonna have good days and bad days, right?
of
Like
course.
and there's nothing to say that if I'm having a bad day, I can't go out and crush my training, right?
Yeah,
That's another thing. Like these
exactly.
these
Yeah.
red, yellow, green, simplicity kind of conditional formatting stuff. We know that stuff doesn't work very well because there's context,
Yeah.
right? But it's a matter of if every day I'm in the red that I throttle myself, I'm kind of like wearing on my recovery rope, my resilience rope. And
Yeah.
I might be really robust and I can do that for a long time, or maybe I'm not. But that's
Yeah.
eventually going to get us into problems. So it's looking at those trends, eventually being able to pull in AI analytics, being able to forecast and model some of this stuff, to
Hmm.
be able to kind of predict maybe where we're going to be with some type of validation to know that we could trust those models and things like that. I think that's where we can go. But again, going back to your question, like I think the other interesting thing about that type of technology is it gives individual feedback no matter what these devices are, the user interfaces are phenomenal. They're engaging to the
Yeah.
warfighter and they like them. That's why these are, I don't know how big that industry is, but like it's something that I think could help us. But again, like that
Yeah.
comes with, there's other considerations when you're talking about this type of technology, whether it be security and things like that, that have to be figured out so it's done the right way, that it protects our warfighters, doesn't put them in danger. And then the ethical responsibilities. What do you do with that data? What commanders could use it? How can they use it? I think that's important to talk about too, because you want to have the right governance to make sure that we're not penalizing warfighters for doing certain things. So I think those are that's kind of like a future conversation that may or may not ever happen, but I think there's
Sure.
promise there potentially.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And this is really cool to talk about because I loved what you brought up about, you know, treating coaches and practitioners as physiological engineers and like formalizing that into like a STEM major, making it way more robust. I think there's an element to this question that I'm going to ask where it's like that would raise the standard of everyone's expertise and kind of fix it at a level akin to like med school or becoming a lawyer or becoming an engineer, right? Where it's like, nope, to get any of those jobs, this is the minimum amount of schooling, right? That you do to be given those complexities and to solve them, like, hopefully in good conscience. But I want to know like about how as a field we need to diversify, and so therefore like what expertise is missing that we need to be inviting from other fields potentially to address the deficits in the human performance realm.
Yeah, great question, Coop. And just going back to the physiological engineering thing, that's a stretch goal and a half, right? So
Hey,
I
I'm going
don't
to use that the rest of the episode. We're going to make it
I
normal. I'll use it in
I
other
don't
episodes
anticipate that
too.
happen anytime, and I
No,
just think that
thankfully,
we
but
we just don't give ourselves enough credit for the complexities we deal with,
yeah.
and especially with strength and conditioning. I think oftentimes we're some of the other fields or even aspects of human performance kind of look down on us as the knuckle draggers of the community. And I just think that is a grossly misrepresented view of our profession and the
Totally.
complexities that go about being successful in it. And we do it to
Mm-hmm.
ourselves sometimes. We need to try to elevate that image because that's going to help us have more credibility as a profession.
Yep.
In terms of what we're missing, I really think if we're trying to modernize, we need to embrace the idea that we need, performance scientists, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we have, sports scientists in sports. I think we need performance scientists in the military. Again, just my personal opinion on that. I think that we also, along with that, we have to differentiate the role and scope of a performance scientist versus a data scientist versus a strength and conditioning coach. And I think this is critical going forward. I think a performance scientist is not a data scientist. A data scientist is somebody who is classically educated in statistics. They are somebody who does
Mm.
research on statistics.
Yeah.
They develop models. They build things like that. They do not understand performance physiology. They do not understand interdisciplinary performance domains. They don't understand training methodology. They are a statistical engineer, which is great. They are somebody who runs numbers without any of the context of what's going on around them. A strength and conditioning coach is somebody who conducts training, designs programs, runs assessments, builds relationships, works hands on with the warfighters and the performance programs. A performance scientist is somebody who understands enough about all the domains of human performance, understands training methodology, understands training analytics and the derivatives of them,
Mm-hmm.
understands how to speak the language of human performance across domains, up and down, from commanders and leaders down to strength coaches and dietitians, and uses statistics and data as a way to communicate and facilitate across that. They're not just the technology guy or girl,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have bastardized this. We have often taken data scientists and said, hey, you're the data guy. Well, you're going to be the sports scientist or the performance scientist. And they're like, I don't know anything about this stuff. Right. And
Yeah.
now they're stuck in a position where they're trying to answer questions because we have a gap in the position. We need to hire specific FTEs for performance science if we want to be able to elevate this culture and modernize. We got to be able to do that across the enterprise, in my opinion. We need to align them with leadership elements. I think that's critical in order to being able to embrace this because a lot of classically trained strength coaches don't have a background in performance analytics. You start talking about training strain and monotony or derivatives of acute to chronic workload ratio, and they look at you like, I don't know what the heck you're talking about,
Yeah. No
right?
fucking clue. Right. Yeah.
And that's a barrier. You need
Yeah.
somebody who could be part of that team and structure, who could speak strength coach, who could talk to a dietitian, who could talk to a sports medicine professional, then could go talk to a program director, could talk to a leader or a commander about how these analytics can be used to solve the problems they care about. and to be that interdisciplinary or really transdisciplinary glue in an organization, the way that it's really been modeled very successfully, especially in Australian and Eastern European sport, but in some settings in Western sport as well. We're missing that. That will help us with providing education. I think if we're going to deal with data and analytics, we have to be more educated about how to understanding, how to read it, communicate it, and talk to it. If I'm a SME with analytics and your level of knowledge is really low, Coop,
Hmm.
I'm not going to be able to communicate with you. It's like my daughter, like she's starting to read now, but she can't just pick up a novel and go to town. She could pick up some sight words, she could sound some things out.
Yeah. Don't give her
So I
Tolkien
can't
yet. Yeah.
so I can't talk to her via written communication, right?
Yeah.
So if we're going to
Right.
have dashboards and
Right.
reports and analytics on slides, and our military leadership and our human performance team doesn't understand what those numbers mean, well, shame on us. We have to improve that. We have to raise the level of education in our community so that everybody can speak a common language. I think that
Hmm.
is critical to changing the culture, which means everyone has to grow because we don't have it in our curriculum. Most of us take a Stats 100 class that we hate, that we flush the second we get out of it. Maybe you take a graduate level research class. By the way, none of these classes are specific to human performance. They're just agnostic to whatever that professor wants to teach to, which is probably not our job. It goes in one
Yeah.
ear, out the other, and we avoid statistics like the plague. We need to
Yeah.
change that. If we want to change the culture and to modernize, we have to be able to speak a common language.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that. My wife's a biostatistician, so she gets super into the statistics elements of this things and
Awesome.
like study design and modeling and all that such. And she sort of views it as this universal language that can be applied to any field, but it's the lack of like specific expertise to these things. Like she's like, look, I know I could do it for like, I don't know, let's say the Philadelphia Eagles, right?
Mhm.
But she's like, I am a second year football fan. You know what I mean? Like I don't know what I'm actually talking about were I to present the data. But she's worked with a lot of like pediatric cancer, and she can do that, right? Like at a level that
Mhm.
like probably not a lot of people can. So the question I have for you following up on this is going to be two parts, but I'm going to withhold that second part. The first part is you want to create one of these people you're talking about, these generalists who are really good across domains, across disciplines, and can
Performance
have that,
scientists.
yeah, performance scientists, right? Like, how are you going to tell one person how to get there?
Oh, you mean how to become a performance
Yeah.
scientist?
How are they
Yeah.
how are they going to achieve that?
Yeah, so this is a great question, right? So we need academic partners here too. There are
Okay.
curriculums that are starting to develop in
Yep.
North America now for sports science.
Mm-hmm.
Really, it should be called sport and performance science.
Mm-hmm.
Performance science differentiating for the tactical kind of world, and sport, same job, two different environments, right? So we're
Mm-hmm.
starting to see curriculums pop up across North America. They already existed in Europe and Australia for decades. Um,
Yeah.
we need to embrace credentialing. The NSCA has the Certified Performance Sports Science certification, which differentiates somebody as a sports scientist, doesn't it? And we have to understand there's different roles for sports scientists too, or performance science, right? There's the research role, which is you work in a lab and you're conducting performance research. You're writing papers on this type of stuff. That's a very valuable role. That is very different than the applied perspective, which is somebody
Mm-hmm.
working on part of a performance team trying to solve performance problems in an actual performance environment. So there's two different tracks, right? You can go the research, which is the slow sports science route, or you can go the applied side, which is the fast sports science route. But I think we got to get credentialed. I think sports scientists need to get the equivalent of their CSCS, which is the CPSS right now in North America. I think that's a fantastic certification. Again, like choose it if you want, not endorsing the NSCA, but I think that is a standard, or we need a better standard
It's
perhaps, but
something, right? Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
It's the only one that exists to my knowledge. And then I think the other thing is we need more curriculum, right? And then we need to create a need where we're not going to just say, you're the strength coach who's interested in technology, and I don't have manpower for another person. So you're going to be the sports scientist or the performance scientist on our team, right? We
Mm-hmm.
need to create scope documents that kind of like if as a strength coach, I can't be a physical therapist, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I can't go, hey, we don't have the money to pay for a PT, so I'm going to be the physical therapist this week, right? I
Mm-hmm.
can't. I'd be outside of scope to do that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
outside of scope for a strength coach to interpret analytics, to do those types of things if they're not trained in sport and performance science. We need to differentiate that. We need to work with our strategic partners to do that. And we need to make job descriptions and scopes very clear so that we could hire credentialed, trained providers in those areas that aren't data scientists, that aren't strength and conditioning coaches. And a lot of strength coaches grow into sports science. That's what I did. Right.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But it's different than a strength coach. It's different than a data scientist. We blur the lines too much. Oftentimes, I think to save money and say, hey, we could just have this one person do two or three things. That's not fair to the individual. It's not fair to the organization. It's not fair ultimately to the warfighter. We need, in my opinion, just to distinguish, to differentiate in there, and to go down those hiring paths.
Mhm. Yeah, that I the hiring paths is an interesting element because I feel like, I have no college education really around strength and conditioning. I was all self-taught, YouTube U, man. And I do feel like when you want to get these kinds of jobs, but you have to have, some of these credentials, some of these degrees, some of these certifications and such. But I wonder, like, from a perspective of looking at things a different route, like, have you seen anybody kind of take some more alternative pathways to kind of get into these rooms and train these people, or do you feel like it has to be traditional academia based?
No, it doesn't have to be traditional. I'm a huge fan of autodidactic learning. That's when I look at my career with applied sport and performance science and data science. I'm an autodidactic learner. I didn't go to school for sports science. I didn't go to school for data science.
Yeah.
I read 20 different books on data science, attended courses, self-taught myself,
Yeah.
statistical science, right? And then same thing for sports science, grew into that position, forced myself to be an early adopter and took that certification early on. But then grew into that role based upon the responsibilities kind of put on top of me and my team, right? So
Yeah.
there are alternative paths, and I think alternative paths fill a gap for only so long. Eventually, there'll be enough
Mm-hmm.
credentialed programs that exist in
Mm-hmm.
academia
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
produce degree certified practitioners.
A standard.
And
Yeah.
a standard right
A
now, it's
standard.
kind of
Yeah.
it's sports science and performance science is kind of where strength and conditioning was in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we are right now in America, right? It's
Yeah.
growing massively. Practitioners are being employed at FTE levels all across sport, right? It's growing
Yep. Yep.
massively. Have already argued we have a need for it in the military setting. It is
Yeah.
taking off nationally, but it is still in its early days, which is great because it gives us the opportunity to shape it. It
Yeah.
gives us the opportunity to kind of do what our forefathers did in strength and conditioning in the early 90s as the field was booming, right? And to give it credibility, to differentiate its role, and to argue for the value and necessity of it within our organizations. And that's what we have
Yeah.
to do. We have to become advocates. When we're looking at men, do I get another sports medicine person or do I get a performance scientist? We have to choose the performance scientist because we don't have them, right?
Yeah. Literally.
And
Yeah.
and that's the hard thing when you got people on treatment patients tables,
Yeah.
right? Because you're overburdened and you're trying to keep up with work. But we have to figure out how do we help our organizations and our the greater human performance profession modernize and grow. We have to make these types of decisions again, in my personal opinion.
Got it. Okay. So it sounds like the performance scientist is someone who is just the highest leverage individual that an organization can hire,
I
right?
don't know about that. There's somebody who knows enough about everything that understands how to communicate highly complex data analytics based structures, could
Mm-hmm.
speak to leadership or in sport like the coaches, could also
Yeah.
speak to the players and to the practitioners, right? I like to think of them as like interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary glue, right? And
Yeah.
then the medium that they speak is in data, right?
Yeah.
Again, different than a data scientist who just lives solely in the world of data research, modeling,
Mm-hmm.
statistical constructs, things of that nature, but doesn't understand performance. The
Yeah.
performance scientist has a statistical background, not maybe to the level of a data scientist. Some might, right? But they could speak this language across domains. They understand the types of problems they're trying to solve. And again, you could be a research version of this, or you could be an applied version of this.
Mm-hmm.
Those career paths look very, very different.
Yeah. Okay. So the question I asked for this one, right, was how would you like kind of describe this to an individual, like what path they would take to kind of, get there. Now, the second part of this question is going to be you've got this person. Now they're standing in front of a battalion, right? So I don't know what size a battalion is. Like you probably know better than I, but I'm going to assume that's thousands, right? Um, My question here, or excuse me, brigade would be thousands. So they're standing in front of a brigade, right? What are they saying to this audience of generals all the way down to privates that is going to convince them to buy into what they're saying?
I don't necessarily see that as how I would operationalize it. I see this
Mm-hmm.
person as speaking to the leadership and the
Mm-hmm.
leadership of the human performance teams
Mm-hmm.
on the analytical trends, on the context of what's going on in the data, because they could understand and decipher that. Remember, this stuff is not linear. So you're not
Yep.
going to have a dashboard that gives you all the answers, right?
Right.
People are going to have to interpret that. SMEs are going to have to interpret that. And that's what this person does. It speaks to the leadership. So in this case, if you're talking about the example you gave, speaks to whoever's the leader of that organization.
Mm-hmm.
This is what's going on. This is my recommendations, gets the leadership intent. Sometimes recommendations work, sometimes they don't align with intent, and then you got to go with what the boss says. But then that leader takes that information and communicates it their own way through the relationships and the subordinate structure they have with the formation. I don't think you'd put the sports scientist or performance science in front of the formation. You'd put them, align them operationally with the leaders within the human performance programs and within the organization itself to communicate analytic trends, to be able to talk about, hey, you told us this particular thing is concerning. We looked
Mm-hmm.
at the data. We've created KPIs. We've identified limiters. We've been able to model and forecast trend and risk. This is what's going on. Here's my thoughts on this. What's applicable to you, right? And give them a list of options of things that they could work with. That's the
Mm-hmm.
role. And it's not this practitioner is not necessarily a warfighter facing person, although they can absolutely speak to warfighters in certain cases. I think it's more of a strategic position, speaking to human performance leadership and military organizational leadership, aligning that
Mm-hmm.
way. Again, in my opinion.
Got it. So then so then if they're this, what, transdepartmental glue, so to speak, I think that was maybe the term you used. What are they saying to the commander versus what are they saying then maybe to that like strength coach, that brand new strength coach you guys just hired? Maybe that's a better question.
Yeah, I think communication 101 is knowing your audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, just like, we're talking here, and most of the people on this call are probably people in human performance. I think it's safe we could speak
Yeah.
about human performance type topics, and most people know
Yeah.
what the heck we're talking about. But what a commander or leader cares about is vastly different than probably what a strength and conditioning coach cares about. So I might talk to a strength and conditioning coach
Yep.
about internal, external loads,
Mm-hmm.
recovery response to those loads, how that impacts the training plan that's been designed. So again, going back to how do we be flexible in our approach? Like, hey, loads have been really creeping up, recoveries tanking. These are not recent trends, but we're developing a pattern here, right? We might want to think about correcting something. Our assessment results might be going a certain way. We might want to consider about tweaking something. To a commanding officer might be talking about risk, might be
Mm-hmm.
talking about risk or the metrics that particular commanding officer is giving guidance that these are my KPIs I care about. So you put it in the context of things of how those other outcomes are impacting the things that that commanding officer cares about. And that it's going to be very different by organization, by unit, by mission, by
Yeah.
service branch,
Totally.
right? So again, like there's no one size fits all approach to human performance in this sector. It has to be customized. We need kind of enterprise standards, in my opinion, but they need to be flexible enough to meet each unit or each mission where they are, and create that kind of autonomous structure, but with a set of kind of guiding principles that kind of direct us in a common direction.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, also, folks, if you're still listening, tuning in, get your questions in. We'll move into the Q&A here pretty soon. So just wanted to flag that. But my follow up to that is like the military is obviously so well known for its rigid structure, and essentially what you're saying is that like when it comes to training, that kind of can't really exist if we want the best result, right? We need to have this concurrent model. We need to have this flexibility. We need to be able to change things in the day to day. Like talk to me about that competing thought process there, because I would argue
Yeah.
that that's like what you're describing is like someone comes out of boot camp and you give them that level of autonomy in their training and they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like,
No,
I'm supposed
no.
to be here at this time, like eating this, doing this. Like, so let's dive into that as kind of like a way to wrap us up as people get their questions in.
Yeah, I don't that I apologize, that's what came off with. That's not what I mean. I mean that,
Yep.
from a formation specific approach, right? Like wherever you're at, and it's going to look different in different organizations, different units, Um, we are trying to create an approach that is modernized by using data to inform decision making instead of just
Mhm.
relying on this is what's on the calendar. Again, this is all my opinion too, right?
Of course.
I don't want to misrepresent myself, right? So whatever's on the training calendar needs to be flexible, right? Again,
Hmm.
if we care about reducing the things that the military is concerned about, whether that be injuries or readiness or other things that we care about, right? We have to change our approach because we've had a lot of issues with that stuff, right?
Hmm.
So we
Hmm.
can't just keep doing the same thing and expect it to produce different results, right?
Of
We
course.
know what
Yeah.
that's the definition of, right? So I guess what we're talking about here is how do we evolve our process to get even more return on investment out of these programs? And that means we got to operationalize changing how we make decisions, and that's going to look different in every organization. There's no cookie cutter approach to that, but I think if we embrace the idea that we can't just blindly do what we planned out 6 months ago. Now you can still
Yeah.
achieve those
Yeah.
objectives, right, from your medals or whatever you're working on, right? But we might take a little different approach. We might bounce some of those ideas off of our data. We might align our human performance programs with our decision making in that training calendar, like the way they are done in sports settings that are very successful. That would help us, right? That would, and
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
another thing
Yeah.
is like this is not a. I don't want to misconstrue this. This is not like blink tomorrow. This is how we act.
Right.
This is a long-term goal. Like you got the way you move culture in the military, it's by making small little wins, gaining momentum gradually over time. The way that we get to where we're trying to go here to this evolved model is over decades, right?
Hmm.
Of just slowly influencing, slowly embedding processes and systems and different ways of thinking, and then getting wins from it, and then having leaders be leaders and champion it. And that's what we need. And I think that's happening. It has happened the last 15 to 20 years. I hope, I got 20, 25 years left, God willing, getting to do this type of work. And I hope by the time I hang it up in my mid 60s that we could look back across the picture and say, wow, we moved the
Yeah.
needle tremendously. But
Oh
in any
yeah.
given month or year, it might not seem like it's moving at all. So it's going to take
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. I think patience, right, is, I don't know, like a virtue I've kind of been locking in on a lot more lately. Just truly understanding how long it takes to, yeah, create that cultural change or, relational change. So yeah, I admire your ability to think in 20 to 25 years from now. You know what I mean? Because I think a lot of people struggle to even see the weeks ahead. And knowing full well that like those um that's where you win. You know what I mean? What can I do in the next 4 weeks that even if it's just 2% increase here, we do 2% better, or we, get 2% of a cultural change. Like that shit adds up, doesn't it?
I mean, how many
So
guys do you know do the same 5 mile training run every Monday?
oh God,
Why
man.
do we do that? Because that's what we always do on Monday. We do the
That's
same
just Monday. It's leg
out and
day.
back. It's Monday.
Yeah.
So you get
Yeah.
monotony from that. You get a lack of adaptation. There's something to the consistency. That's good, right?
Yep.
But we need to think through the process
One
more, and
thing.
then we can
Yeah.
monitor the response to that training and go, hey, man, like these metrics are showing us, as well as your assessment results, that that's not really moving the needle much. And maybe you're at a point where you
Yeah.
don't need to, where that's already so good. Hey, okay, then let's just maintain. But if it's not, right, then we could have the data to inform our next steps through that
Yep.
awareness generated by it.
Yep. Oh no, that makes a ton of sense. So then I guess, and it's good that because we'll go into the Q&A now, folks. But this is Clint Stricker. He asked this question, and I'm going to have lots of follow up to this. Do you have an example of a process you've integrated or wanted to integrate into an organization to be more data informed? And I will kind of like add a little bit of that, like I feel like something that would be really helpful for everyone while kind of keeping in mind like the constraints here is like don't name brands, but if you can name the piece of technology, right? Like that is useful, that is like gives you good data. If that's something that seems feasible, I think that would help us get a lot of practical knowledge out of that question.
Yeah, I'll give one example of something I think that was implemented really well and something that kind of
Yep.
crashed and burned a little bit, right? Related to the same thing. So, one of the things I've worked on in the past is recovery science based. How do
Mm.
we take augmented recoveries, things like float chambers and photobiomodulation and other things like that, and how do we help them to sustain our warfighters that are in a constant state of under recovery, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
they're
Mm-hmm.
constantly training, constantly working. We want them to be ready all the time. Can we use technology to facilitate that? So we did a rather large literature review with a lot of strategic partners. We identified what the mechanisms were that these tools moved, right? And then we produced visuals for this that were like flow charts. But then we took it a step further, and this is where the data
Mhm.
comes in. So it's one thing to just do the contrast cold tub or a cold tub every single day. We could argue that's not the best way to use the cold tub, but it
Yeah.
might be very good to use the cold tub if I have really high soreness, right?
Mhm.
Especially in a period of time when I don't want really high soreness because maybe I have to be ready to go do some type of training or something. So what we did is the particular athlete management system we were using is we programmed in all the different statistical indicators for these thresholds in the data. So now a warfighter, just by using their devices and putting in their surveys, if a particular trend was tripped, they would get a notification on their phone saying, hey, the best recovery tools for you to use today are A, B, and C based upon your conditions. So now we're taking recovery science and we're applying it using it in near real-time instantaneous data. That was relatively successful, right? Some guys still wanted to do what they wanted to do when they wanted to. Again, going back to the horse to water analogy, you can't always make them drink it, even though it's the best thing in the world for them.
Mhm.
Where I failed once is as a performance scientist, I wanted to work with the rehabilitation staff. So we had these clinic reports that would make that would look at everybody who's been seen in the clinic and then provide recommendations for them. And originally, my thought was, okay, I can kind of produce like an auto-regulatory type of protocol for the clinic, for the physicians, so that they understood, Timmy's going through this today. We're not going to push him hard, or we are going to push him hard. And I
Yeah.
spent a lot of time and effort on that, and that was universally rejected by the clinic, right? Great idea, but culturally, that's just not how they worked. They had
Mhm.
no interest in that. So I found my key stakeholders on the team. Maybe some of them are listening today. Thank you for buying in and helping me with this. But we rephrased it to be like, okay, what would work for you? Talk to them. They identified the variables they actually care about because originally it was what I thought was important. So I talked to my audience, got more grounding from them, put it into a clean report to guide recovery prescription. So now, if you're looking at it and you're like, hey, I got this guy who I'm going to treat today. These are his patterns in sleep or HRV or resting heart rate, whatever they might be that we care about. These are the recovery tools can help that. So if I can get a guy have better recovery, better sleep, he's going to deal with the rehabilitation of his injury better. He's going to have a better neuroendocrine response, better response to pain. He's going to recover faster. He's going to come back to duty faster. Those are the
Mhm.
things that clinicians, sports medicine practitioners care about is how fast can we get this guy back ready to go do the job as quickly as possible, keep it from becoming severe. And that worked very well in the clinic. They
Yeah.
liked that. So what I did and another thing was instead of making them log into a dashboard to look on their own, which was a deal breaker to them because these are folks who are just busting their butt all day in the clinic,
Yeah.
hands on patients, right? I hand printed the reports and carried it each morning to each practitioner and spent 20 to 30 seconds just giving them the highlights personally. So I came off the weight room floor, went into the clinic, made the reports, takes 20 minutes, deliver that communication. Again, being the facilitator of awareness as a performance scientist and communicating that to the stakeholders in a sports medicine team. And that was much more effective than the original approach is like, hey, I'm going to give you your constraints on training that they vomited up. Hope that
Mm.
answers your question there, Clinton.
I feel like that's a great response and maybe opens a broader theme that you've been talking about, which is the most important thing. It sounds like maybe not the most important thing, a very important thing that you can do, no matter where you are. I don't care if you're just like local personal trainer, right? Like versus training the president, like you know what I mean, like your ability to inform others of the work you've done. It's almost like being able to show your work, right? And clearly relay that to the next person and let them use that work to make their work better. Right. And it creates sort of these like cycles, you know what I mean? That I think, like, to your point, I think that this like really made a lot of things clear for me is you are not the nutritionist, but you showing a report of the training that they've done, right, will maybe let the nutritionist decide when it's time to up some carbs, change some macros around, use specific foods. Oh, this person's struggling with soreness. Maybe we can up this kind of substrate, right? Like all these things. It just gives them more informed decision making from head to toe. But all you did was take 20 minutes to generate a report and
Yeah,
hand
I
it to
think
them.
it's meeting them where they stand too, Coop, right?
Yeah.
So Not every dietitian cares about those metrics.
Totally.
Some might care about other things, right? It's
Yeah.
identifying what that stakeholder cares about and then looking at, do I have access to information that can create awareness that can empower their decision making? And then how can I communicate to them? Maybe that practitioner wants a dashboard. Okay, can I help design a dashboard to give them this information from a monitoring perspective? Or maybe they're too busy and that is a barrier of logging into the system. They're just not going to do it. So now I got to be willing to be the personal facilitator of this information. Again, it's
Hmm.
going to look different in every organization relative to scale and size. And I'm not saying this is where it works, but those are best practices in sport performance sciences, being
Yeah.
that facilitator, helping people solve problems they care about, right?
Hmm.
And that's what modernization is. It's doing that through the medium of using data and technology to get after that stuff better, not just purely the coach's eye, which is still important, but we could augment that. We can empower
Hmm.
it. I think that's what
Yeah.
we're hopefully getting through to the audience today.
Yeah. So to reiterate, it sounds like regardless of organization size and all those other factors that play into it, there is probably some very personal touch you could put on, you know, someone else's KPI using your work that would help them make a better decision.
Yeah, again, it goes down to knowing your audience, which is key to everything, right? And
Yep.
different audiences respond to different things. And then, being willing to be flexible, right? I think in this role as a performance scientist, you have to be humble enough. And I've talked to a lot of other folks in this industry who are some of the OGs and had great conversations with them at conferences and stuff. And yeah, you got to meet them where they are. You got to give
Hmm.
them small wins, right? And then you kind of build from there. And that's really sage wisdom from those folks. And that's where we got to start. We got to leave our egos behind and we have to meet them where they are and then help them grow, right? Help them get to things that are important to them. But again, the caveat here, and this is where I get frustrated sometimes, is the answer can't be no, right? And what I mean by that is the answer can't be, I don't want any of that stuff. I'm not never going to look at that. I don't care about it, period. That type of status quo, that type of immediate rejection of advancing our knowledge and our ability to make better decisions is dangerous,
Mm.
and I think it will hurt us. We have to embrace getting to yes, gradually, sure. But to just the immediate reluctance, that's not how I do things. I don't want to do it like that. I'm not interested in any of it. That is going to only hurt us. And
Kiss of
again, if there's
death. Yeah.
people out there listening to this, like, love those approaches, like, those are probably great coaches or practitioners, and they are, and they mean something. Just grow with us. Grow with us at your own speed. You don't got to go to 0 to 100. Work with these performance scientist positions and take that initial step. And okay, I can't do everything, but what can I do? Okay, I could look at this thing maybe once a day or once a week on my guys.
Hmm.
I could see how I could maybe apply that in the weight room a little bit. I can understand how I could look at, biomarker data alongside things like HRV that are highly correlated with it. I could take that
Hmm.
initial step towards a better understanding, getting some of that context and awareness, and then see how it works, and then iterate from there. And I think that's how we make progress. We build momentum.
I like that. I like that a lot. Little wins, one thing at a time. Right. Cool. Next question. When speaking of return on investment money wise, how would you approach explaining the ROI of SNC or the HP program in, in entirety in terms of money invested in the program and what they get from it? So basically, like, how would you kind of explain how much money they're actually saving? I think is what
Yeah.
Matt is asking.
Yeah. This is an incredible question, Matt, and I appreciate it. I'm going to punt, but I'm not going to punt out of disrespect for your question. I'm going to punt just because I don't want to cross lines here. However, I will tell you, if you go online and you start searching for like military human performance ROI, you're going to find some incredible articles that have been peer reviewed, some very recently published, from some incredible authors. Some of those people might be on this call as well that propose different strategies. I will say this. I don't believe there is a singular universal strategy to identifying return on investment. I think we need multiple layers of approaches. I think we need multiple different techniques that attack the problem from different angles, and we need to understand the constraints.
Mm-hmm.
The constraints and the confounders in place. We need to be transparent when this research is done. We need to make sure that we're acknowledging the limitations of it. But there are many, many, many different approaches out there. Several have been published, the last couple of years, and there's some great examples of empirical reviews of return on investment for these programs. And I would encourage you to read those. I just don't want to jump into that part of the conversation if that's okay.
That's fine. I can maybe give some more context in using a bridge example here. You know what I mean? There was um, a police department essentially who, kind of came down to some budget stuff like, hey, well, what are we going to implement? Right. And a question someone asked, was like, well, if this hamstring thing is a really big issue for you guys and you guys like see this injury taking people out for X, da 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 da, like, but if you had more insight and were able to address one of this common hamstring injury that you guys have, how much money would that save you? And I mean, it was like tens of thousands, right? So, such as to say that, like, when choosing to implement a technology like Bridge, it was like, you make sure one hamstring injury doesn't happen, you've paid for it like 10 times over. You know what I mean? So, I feel like for a lot of this stuff, like, we can even get into like crazy conversations about like footwear, right? Like, using one type of cleat or one type of, shoe versus another when training. Like, I know a baseball example is like, okay, you want to hit the ball really far. That means you need a lot of lateral rigidity in the shoe. But you know what lateral rigidity in the shoe does? It makes you run really fucking sloppy. So when you sprint to first base, you are blowing your Achilles up with like X amount more tension, per step. Like, so these little technology pieces and these little like return on investment things, like it's it's so critical to understand, like, I think in my opinion, like what problem one piece of technology or one practitioner on your team, like what problems are they solving and how expensive are those problems, because it might be a $50 upcharge for a better shoe that saves $1 billion because Shohei Ohtani it gets to keep playing for the Dodgers at the rate he is. um
You also want to start with the right problems, right? You want to start with the
yeah.
problems, identify the sources of data you have to be able to solve them. And if you're missing
Hmm.
sources of data, understand, can you get access to those sources of data and what the cost of that is, if it's possible. And if not, you have to acknowledge your limitation. We might not be able to solve the problem we're trying to solve given the limited state of our data infrastructure, right?
Hmm.
So identify the problem, always start there. Look for best practices in literature, right? Other people have really, really done some great work in this sector and they've kind of cracked the nut on a couple of these issues. I would look to those and see if you could apply those strategies to your particular organization. And I think there's a lot of gold out in this place. And let's be honest, we know the ROI exists, guys. We see it every day in this field. We've seen the culture change. We see the buy-in from the warfighter. We see the improvements. We have to empirically demonstrate that. That's part of our obligation as working in this sector. So there's lots of strategies out there that could be applied.
Beautiful. And I think last question for today, I think someone asked a simple one is like, how do you choose KPIs? How do you choose what to measure? I think that's a great way for us to wrap it up today.
Yeah, this is a challenge in the military space, right? Because typically you do a really good needs analysis, right? And a needs analysis would normally be based on the sport competition demands or practice demands, right?
Yeah.
We could do that on practice demands decently. We could do that by profiling, different jobs and things like that. But again, going back to one of the biggest confounders and challenges we have in the space is we don't know what the competition space is going to look like.
Hmm.
So because of that, you don't know if what you're actually doing training wise or the metrics associated with training actually translate into real world type of things. That's a challenge. It doesn't mean we don't go there. It just means we have to acknowledge that limitation. I think you got to look at that organization by organization. What are the metals you're working at? What are the things that are important to that leadership team? And then once you've figured that out and you put on your physiology hat, going back to education group that you asked at
Yep.
the beginning, is you need to be able to look at those tasks and those constraints and those job demands, understand physiologically what those things are getting after. And then do you have a way of assessing that? Do you have a way of monitoring that? It could be
Hmm.
kinetic, it could be kinematic, it could be, through strength indexes or whatever it might be, depending on your situation, right? And then I think the next step that we often fail at is we can get all these KPIs together, but we forget about the KPI's little brother, which is the key performance limiter. What are the things that are going to hold you back from accomplishing that KPI? Right now, you need to identify those, and you got to figure out, is there a way of monitoring them? Like if readiness is something you're really interested in, well, we know that sleep is a limiter of readiness. We know how sleep impacts performance. We know how sleep impacts
Hmm.
cognition. We know how sleep
Hmm.
impacts injury risk. Well, I'd say, okay, is there a way to monitor sleep? Can you track sleep? Right? Can you find ways? And if you track it, right, are there ways to action it? Can you optimize sleep? Can you identify challenges with it and then work to create education around it, to create environments where we get more restorative sleep? If we know that that is one of the factors holding us back from accomplishing one of the KPIs we care about, just an example, in my opinion. But like, that's what you have to do. You have to cast that net. You got to do your diamond study, and you got to understand the military is always changing too. So it's going to be different from one unit. If you go from one unit in service branch X to another service branch, those KPIs might be very different. You might be different in a
Yeah.
training environment versus an operational unit. You got to take that into account, and you got to be flexible, right? And the approach that worked for you last year and whatever unit you were at might not be the best approach for this place, right? And you got to adapt. And I think that's the key. Bring your lessons learned forward, but adapt and be aware and be willing and humble enough to change your approach, to change the things you care about, given the situation that you're in. If we all do more of that, if we pull in some data, if we think about being a little bit more data informed to remove some of our bias, if we do that in a strategic, enterprise wide, efficient, effective way, we can modernize and we can reach the objectives we're trying to get to as a kind of global human performance force for our country. And I think we could really step into that role and deliver even more value than the substantial value we already have.
Love it. Beautiful. Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. I hope folks that you got a lot out of that. I know I did. Some of my key takeaways today were like kind of what we finished up with. The key performance limiters. I think that's something that is severely overlooked. I believe that from some of the other notes I took, like just looking back here, like there is so many ways to skin this cat, but your ability to get your hands dirty and get as deep into the context of your local environment as possible is probably going to be like the main predictor of your immediate success. Like you said, there are a million scenarios for every situation, and you can theory craft all day long, but ultimately it's like your boots on the ground and your ability to like make those small little changes that's going to move the needle. So Joe, very grateful for your time today, man. I feel like I speak for everyone here when I say that was like incredibly insightful conversation. So is there, any way people can kind of follow along with you, ask you direct questions or get to know you a little more from here?
Yeah, you guys could find me on LinkedIn and all that. I also have if you're not working for the federal government, like I have a consulting company that's out there, Immediate Performance Solutions. You could look up that. Can't work with anybody in the federal government on that though. But and if you're in my network circles professionally, please shoot me an email, drop me a message. I'll get to you that way. I want to say thank you to everybody who stuck through. We're almost at 2 hours, so I know
Yeah,
everybody's busy and we got lives and jobs and stuff like that. So it means a lot that you guys took the time to listen. And Coop, thank you for you and the rest of the team for inviting me. Really
of
appreciate it. I'm
course.
glad that it was insightful. Please, anybody out there, reach out. Love to have a conversation further to kind of help. So
Cool.
keep
Excellent, folks.
pushing.
Well, yeah. On that note, we'll wrap up today. Keep pushing, and we'll catch you all on the next one. All right. Thanks again, Joe. See you guys.
Thanks, everybody.